Hey everybody, it's Mark. It's April 18th, 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time. This is the Zoom meeting for our class. As of right now, we do not have any participants. However, I'm going to record this and I'll give you a couple of tips as we go along. Might help you with some of the coursework and some of the papers that we will be writing. But I'm going to give it a couple more minutes right now just to see if anybody jumps on. If anyone does, and this meeting is not mandatory, we'll take some questions first and then go through a few examples. So sit tight. We'll see who comes on. And I'll confess to everybody, I'm not a Zoom expert. In my full-time job, we use Teams meetings, which I'm a lot better at. Zoom for me is something that I do not use very often, so I'm still trying to learn this process. But I'm going to navigate away for just a second and try and share my screen. Again, I'm learning this as I go. So as everybody knows, in this course we are using APA, and I am still working through finalizing the grades for the first version of the writing project. But I wanted to show you a couple things that I noticed a few folks needed some help with. And this is probably because you're not accustomed to writing in APA. You may have used MLA or something else in your previous courses, maybe in high school or other schools that you've attended. But this is something that we do have to get proficient with because you're not only writing coursework in APA in this class, but you're going to be doing it in other classes as well. One difference between APA and MLA or any other format out there is that APA always includes a title page. And I pulled this up as a good example of what your title page should include. The running head, as you can see here, that would be nice to have, but I'm probably not going to take any deductions if you don't do that. But if you would like to start including it and you're not familiar how to do it, you can Google that, and this will put this same running head on every single page, and I'll show you how that continues. See, there it is again. The second thing is the title page itself and the content on there. So as you can see, there's really only 3 entries on here. This first one is the title of this sample paper. And that always goes up front, middle of the page, centered. It's not left justified, it's centered right here. Then we have the student name, and then Massasoit Community College. I don't even know if that's a real place. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't, who knows. You do not need to put the date on there. You do not need to put my name on there. You don't have to put the class name on there. Title, your name, and Ivy Tech Community College. I know there's some software out there that you can download that will help you format papers. And while it's fine to do that, I don't have any objection to it. I know sometimes it will put on there, blah, 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 university. Well, we're not a university, and I don't know that we're ever going to become one. So if you're using one of those products, fine, just make sure it reads Ivy Tech Community College, not Ivy Tech University. That's a small thing, but something I like to see. Down here, this hypothetical student put author note. You do not have to do this. Notice it has the class name and then the instructor's name. Don't want to see that. Just these 3 things. And the running head if you feel like being ambitious. This particular paper also features an abstract. And again, you could do one if you like, but it's really not required in our course. I think that's probably a little too much work. So again, you do one if you'd like, it's really not necessary. But you will see this in a lot of these sample papers. Here's the running head again. Notice the titles listed here, again, centered, not left justified. That's exactly right, and that's the last time you have to use the title. Notice this. This paper is being written in Times New Roman 12-point font. That's the only font you should be using. If you're using something other than Microsoft Word, I discourage that. Google Docs or There's a variety of other word processing programs out there. Try to write in Word. Again, because if you're a student here, you can download a free copy of Microsoft Office. It doesn't cost you anything, but start writing in Word. It's a lot easier, and that's what I'd like to see. So Times New Roman, 12-point font. Notice this first paragraph is indented. It's not center justified, it's indented. And all the rest of the sentences in this paragraph are all left justified. I'm going to zoom in on this one a little bit so we can see a little more detail. Now, we're writing about food and its effects on society, but one thing that I do like that this writer did is they included the hook. The hook is just the way of getting the reader's attention. Grab someone's interest right off the bat and say, this is why you should continue reading this. This is why it's important. It's good to take a detail out of whatever article you're using as the basis for yours, of an odd detail, something unusual about the subject, an anecdote that you came across. That's a great way of pulling everybody in. And then they move on to the background information. So I caught your attention here with the hook. Now I'm going to tell you why this is important. And that's the background information. And it's important to set up the background information because it helps frame what your argument is going to be. Why is this important? Why should we care? Well, we need to know how we got there first and foremost. And that's a great way of doing that is the background information. And a lot of this can just be taken from the original article that you're using as the basis of your subject. Listing of original sources. This probably isn't going to be as necessary as what we're writing about, food and its effect on society. Before we move on to the thesis, and notice the thesis, it doesn't come up here. It comes down after the hook and the background information. Then they get to their thesis. Now, notice because we're, again, using APA, how this quote is phrased. The introductory word with a comma. You can also use a colon, but commas are more common. The quote in quotes down to here. Notice at the end of the quoted sentence, the word day, there's no punctuation, nor should there be. And that is because the punctuation in a sentence in English always goes last. And there it is, right behind the closed parentheses. So we've got the author's name, when it appeared, on what page they found it, close parentheses, and then the punctuation. And the P period 1 simply means page. So if I want to go back and check this source, I know exactly where to look. I know who the author is, I know what year it appeared, and I know what page they're referencing. Now, I don't think there's an example in this particular sample paper, but what if you don't want to use all of this? You want to pull out a couple of words, but you don't think the entire quote is necessary. What you would do in that case is start wherever you want to be within the quote, and wherever you're taking content out, because it just doesn't apply, use an ellipsis. An ellipsis is a fancy way of saying 3 periods in a row, ... And then you continue on with the quote. That tells me there was more content in there, but I'm just not going to use it all. That's perfectly fine. Another way of using this type of quote is if it's longer than this. This one is what? One full sentence. Okay, fairly short. Let's say you had a quote that you really needed to include, and it's 5 sentences, 5 to 6. In that case, you do not put them in quotes. You list them in the center of the page, kind of like where this list is, and you center them. Still Times New Roman, still double spaced, but centered, so I know that you're using a block quote, and that's what that's called, a block quote, because it's just longer. If I had a quote in here that was more than 6 sentences and it's in this format, that's just too much. It loses the reader. Now let's move on to the thesis. And this one's very well done. Take a minute to read that. So what this writer is doing is setting up. I've given you my hook, I've given you the background information, I've included some quotes. Now, here's what I'm going to argue in this paper. Now, our first writing project was not an argument paper. The second one isn't really so much either. The final writing project, which is the longest one that we will be doing, is an argumentative paper. And you do have to clearly state your thesis, and we do have a couple of workshop items that will be coming up on to help you strengthen your thesis statement. But informing the reader, this is what I'm going to prove. And here's how I'm going to prove it. Now we'll move on here. You can skip over in-text citations, references page. This is something that a lot of people forget the very first time we have a writing assignment. It always says references. It's always on its own page. And the word references is always centered. We don't use the term works cited. That's an MLA term. We're only using the term references. Notice that these are all alphabetized. Last name first. So we have A, B, K, M, R, etc. In parentheses, year that it appeared, title of the material, and where they got it, retrieved from. Now, I'm coming up on the end of my ability to record, so I'm going to jump off, not off this call, but I will stop the recording and then restart it. So that'll come up here in just a short break. Notice everything is double spaced. It's always on its own page. And the second line, here's the first line, the second and third lines, if there is a third line, are indented. They could have said retrieved from and started the URL, this term right here, but they didn't. Put it on its own line and indent, and that's the best way to do this. They have a list here of how to cite just about anything, books, edited books, electronic versions, etc., journal articles. That's fine. When I have to cite something and I'm just not exactly sure how to do it, like it's a podcast or something obscure that I don't normally cite, I go to Purdue OWL. Purdue OWL. OWL. It stands for the Online Writing Lab. They are considered one of the most authoritative sources on how to format just about anything. So when I have a question, that's where I go. So I'm going to go pause, this recording, and then I'm going to jump back on and we will continue.